Here's today's sneaky grief story. And we just call them sneaky grief because truly it just kind of catches you out of the blue. And that way it takes some of the embarrassment out of it, because you also don't get to pick when grief decides to just remind you that it's still here. So we actually, one of my daughters and I, she's 13, we took a trip to China in December. And we were going through their TSA at the airport in Xi'an. And they had changed, we had power banks for our phones and for our tablets. And some of the power banks had been exploding on airplanes and things, so they had actually passed this new law that if your power bank didn't have these 3 C's on the back, it could not go on the plane. And of course we didn't know that because it's not that way in the United States. So we're going through TSA, and they are going through, I mean, like every zipper inside every purse, inside everything. And they pull out all of our power banks and they put them in the bin, and they say, we're keeping these. Well, I see my daughter immediately start to cry, and I'm like, what's going on? And she said, that was Daddy's. Well, I'm a widow. My husband passed away 4.5 years ago, and it was a power bank that he always traveled with. And so this was something of her daddy's. And I mean, she was devastated. There wasn't anything that we could do. We couldn't mail it home. We're in China. So I used I was like, I have to at least try. I have to try. And so, I got out the translation app, and it was a male TSA, whatever they call them, guy. And he sees my daughter crying, and he just rolls his eyes and pulls this girl over. So I was already mad, hurt, whatever. So I use the translation app, and I, explain as best I can. And she just looks at me, no expression, says, no C's, trash, and turns around and just chucks them in the trash. And, we know we're not getting them back at that point. So we're walking away. My daughter is embarrassed, because we're in front of, a bunch of people at the airport. I don't know any of them. They're all Chinese. I, on the other hand, am sobbing, like losing it. And so gather our things, and, I find the nearest restroom. She stands outside with our bags, and I go in and sit down and just lose it in the bathroom stall and just cried and, mopped it up, and then I head back out. And the first thing, she looks at me and she was like, it was mine. Like, why are you even crying? It didn't even belong to you. And I just looked at her and I said, when you hurt, I hurt. And I said, and you couldn't cry, so I cried for you. And I just hugged her, and, we went about our day, as best, as we could. And, what was, and what I'm finding with these sneaky grief attacks is later on that day, you wouldn't have thought something like that would have brought us together. But like, it did something within our hearts, a connection. And we had, we laughed together. There were other things that went wrong that day with like our hotel and just some different things. We found a place to have a steak, which was Daddy's favorite meal. And it was the first place that we saw a Christmas tree in China. And they were playing Christmas carols in English. And there was nobody else in this restaurant that we were in because it was the middle of the afternoon. So we actually sang Christmas carols to our heart's content inside of this restaurant while we enjoyed a steak that Daddy would have enjoyed. And, we just talked about different things. We played a couple of games at the table, and, like, it was probably by far like the sweetest moment of that trip together in China. And so, an example of just how even the bad and even the hurtful things, how God really can use them.